Hello and welcome to Indus News. Live from Islamabad, I'm Hamza Rifat and these are the headlines. The United States says it is working with the international community to continue humanitarian assistance to the Afghan people. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was speaking at a press conference alongside Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and their Qatari counterparts in Doha. Blinken denied reports that the Taliban have blocked Americans attempting to fly out of the northern Afghan city of Mazar-e-Sharif. Meanwhile, the United Nations says basic services in Afghanistan are collapsing, while food and other aid is starting to run out. Pakistan is observing Air Force Day with patriotic zeal today. The day is celebrated to relive the memory of the 1965 war when Pakistani pilots inflicted humiliating defeat on India. Special events are being organized to pay homage to the war heroes. In India, thousands of farmers have gathered in Haryana to pressurize the government to repeal controversial agricultural laws. Authorities had imposed restrictions on gatherings and snapped internet services ahead of the protest. A nationwide strike is also planned on the 27th of September to protest against the laws, which farmers say will jeopardize their livelihoods. Israel's military chief says preparations for possible action against Iran over its nuclear program are being intensified. In an interview, Aviv Kohavi said that a significant increase in the defense budget is intended for this purpose. He also said efforts were underway throughout the Middle East to check Iran's allies. The comments follow a series of warnings from Israeli officials over Iran's nuclear program as questions on the ability to revive the 2015 nuclear deal continue to grow. Mexico has reported over 300 daily COVID-19 deaths and more than 5,000 infections in the last 24 hours. Meanwhile, Pakistan has registered nearly 100 new COVID-19 fatalities and over 3,300 cases in the last 24 hours. Globally, the COVID-19 caseload has topped 221 million, while the death toll has reached over 4.57 million. The news in detail after a short break. Stay tuned to Indus News. And now for the news in detail. The United States says it is working with the international community to continue humanitarian assistance to the Afghan people. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin were addressing a press conference alongside the Qatari counterparts in Doha.
Blinken said Washington believes there are still around 100 American citizens in Mazar-e-Sharif. He said the U.S. is working to ensure charter flights carrying U.S. citizens and at-risk Afghans can leave Afghanistan safely. But Blinken said Taliban officials had told the U.S. they will let people with travel documents freely depart Afghanistan. For his part, Qatar's foreign minister said the Kabul airport will hopefully be running for passengers in the next few days. However, he said no agreement on how to run the Kabul airport has yet been reached. Meanwhile, the UN says basic services in Afghanistan are collapsing while food and other aid is starting to run out. At a press briefing, spokesperson Jens Lark said Lark called for food and humanitarian assistance.
Pakistan is observing Air Force Day with patriotic zeal. The day celebrated to mark the memory of the 1965 war when Pakistani pilots inflicted humiliating defeat on India. The Indian Air Force launched a clandestine attack on Lahore-Burki border, but it failed miserably after valiant resistance by military officers like Major Raja Aziz Bhatti Shaheed. Pakistan Air Force pilot Muhammad Mahmood Alam shot down 5 Indian Air Force Hawker Hunter fighters in less than a minute. He became history's only jet ace in a day in 100 years' history of the world aircraft. On this occasion, special events are being organized to pay homage to the war heroes. Now, as Pakistan honors its armed forces and martyrs of the war, former squadron leader Akbar Ghani recalls the Wagah mission with Indus News.
ने हम पर बेदरेर जारहाना हमला किया तो हमने उसके चैलेंज का जवाब देने के लिए सफ़ें बांध ली.
As tensions escalated in 1965, Indian Army General Chaudhary boasted about the fall of Lahore and to have a drink in Lahore Gymkhana. A day later, the team that squadron leader Akbar Ghani was a part of learned that they were to provide ground support to Wagah as Indian soldiers had crossed the border.
We went straight to Lahore, descended over Shalimar Garden, and followed the road to Wagah border. We were about 500 feet, looking right and left if they were there, and we couldn't find them. So from there, we just turned on the GT road, and Amritsar is very near. We went near Amritsar and we saw the AK guns, because Amritsar radar is there. The AK gun, so we had this is Amritsar, we turned back. Again on the road.
They witnessed movement of Indian troops on the northwest of Wagah. Flight leader Syed Sajjad Haider then gave orders to choose their targets and hit the enemy.
As we came on the border, about 3 miles to the northwest of Wagah, there were tracks in the field. As soon as we went over them, we saw the saffron roundel. And the leader called in abusive language, like the fighter, here they are, the SOBs. So 5, 6, go 5,000 feet for cap and 4 hard guns and let's go for it. Whenever, the attack was made, we see a lot of fire coming out. All the recoilless guns were destroyed. Pattern tanks were there. They were all incapacitated.
He also recalled how the Indian forces ran away following the attack by the Pakistan Air Force.
The officer commanding, he saw that, the thing was not good and people were being killed and all those. There was uprising within his battalion. So he deserted, he ran away. And he has written in his book that when he ended up in the fort in Amritsar, he was only with 1 sock and 1 shoe. His number 2, when he saw the officer commanding has run away, so he followed suit. He also ran back to Amritsar, but he got a cycle from somewhere.
After the 1965 war, Akbar was awarded with Sitare-e-Jurrat, the country's 3rd highest military award. The 83-year-old veteran says if needed, he will be again at service for his country. Manahil Ahmed, Indus News, Islamabad.
Pakistan is observing Air Force Day with patriotic zeal today, and the day is celebrated to relive the memory of 1965 war when Pakistani pilots inflicted humiliating defeat on India. Now to talk more about this, we have with us Air Marshal retired Masood Akhtar. Sir, welcome to Indus News. Now tell us what lessons were learned from the air war of 1965.
Big ones. I think number 1, that when you have good leadership, and Noor Khan was an Iron Man. He led from the front, he demanded discipline from his air warriors, and he had trained them very well. And to top it all, his strategy was good. He decided to preempt. Air Marshal Arjun Singh was his colleague from the erstwhile pre-partition Indian Air Force, and I think he competed very well. And his pilots, people like late Rafiqi, Yunus, Middlecourt, Cecil Chaudhary, Alauddin Butch Ahmed, Air Commodore Sajjad Haider presently, and then he was a squadron leader. When they flew on the 6th, and before that on 1st of September, they had written a tale of excellence and bravado and courage and guts and grit, which has very few parallels. And when we look at the quotations about the 65 war, generally when they talk of the overall war, we think it was a stalemate. But people like Chuck Yeager, people like Chuck Horner, Chuck Yeager, who was the first one to go supersonic in the world in the X-1, and Chuck Horner, who was the JFAC, Joint Air Force Component Commander in Gulf War I, they have nothing but praise for Pakistan Air Force. Chuck Horner says during Gulf War I, he was only scared of the Iraqi pilots who were trained by the Pakistanis. When the Pakistanis, because they're thinking people, when the Pakistanis told them that, look, they are being controlled on the radar by an archaic control system, he said he took a sigh of relief, that now it is not going to be any problem. But if somebody gave him a difficulty during Gulf War I, these were the pilots who were trained by the likes of Rafiki and Yunus and Cecil Chaudhry and Middlecourt. And in fact, in 71, the traditions that they left behind, a single number 14 squadron with 14 to 16 aeroplanes, flew against, you know how many squadrons? 13. 13 fighter squadrons means 13 into 16, something like 160, 200 aeroplanes. So 14 versus 160 to 200 aeroplanes, and they had a kill ratio again of 1:3. In 65 war also, we had a kill ratio of 1:345. And the numbers, Indian Air Force was something like 700 frontline combat aeroplanes, and ours were 260. So a force larger than 1/3 plus 3 times the Pakistan Air Force. Noor Khan had an edge, and he won air superiority right on 1st September when the war was not on. And on 1st of September, late Rafiki and Flight Lieutenant Imtiaz Bhatti, they shot 2 vampires each over Chamjodiyan, right over River Tavi, where the armor, Indian armor and Pakistani armor was bumper to bumper. And you know what they did? They wrote off a big flight of Oregons, which was a French aeroplane, and the vampires, and something like 160 to 200 aeroplanes were taken out of the fight. So 1/3 of the Indian Air Force was taken out on 1st of September just because Rafiki and Imtiaz Bhatti Saab shot 2 aeroplanes each, and they said vampires and Oregons will not be able to survive the war. So that was the kind of feat of leadership, of courage, grit, and training and discipline.
Wow, this is unbelievable to believe, but the fact is Pakistan Air Force has proven its mettle whenever it is tested now. How did the air war affect the outcome of the conflict?
Well, the air war, we had air superiority, relative air superiority. Let us not forget that the Indian Air Force also is a professional air force. They also flew low altitude, 150 nautical miles into Sargodha and Peshawar, and had air combat at the edge of their endurance and range with the Pakistani pilots. There was this Flight Lieutenant Devia who comes in a mist here, and he does slow speed scissors with an F-104. And eventually, in one of the passes, in the effort to get behind one another, they collide. Flight Lieutenant Amjad, he later on rose to be an Air Vice Marshal. He ejects out of the 104, gets a Sitara Jurat, and Flight Lieutenant Devia, he goes down with the aeroplane. He was given a Paramveer Chakra. So notwithstanding that the Indian Air Force is also a professional air force, Noor Khan had an edge. And once I asked him, I said, sir, he was much too senior to me. I asked him, sir, you won the air war. What happened, the air battle, what happened to the war? Actually, the outcome of the war was a very, very fortunate for us and for India also, a stalemate. We wanted to go across into Kashmir and liberate Kashmir through Gibraltar, failed. India wanted to decimate us as a nation and as a military, they failed. And the likes of Rafiki and Yunus and Aziz Bhatti and Shami, they were the ones who at the tactical level gave their blood. And they were able to not only save Pakistan against an enemy that was 5 times, both in all 3, Army, Navy and Air Force. And that is why the army chief very rightly said last evening that the military is fully ready for all conventional and unconventional threats. And we proved it over and over again, 71. We proved it in Kargil. We proved it in the Afghan war. But more importantly, we proved it on 19th February 2019, when the traditions of all these erstwhile giants that I have mentioned, their tales were replicated by smaller people, I mean in terms of junior, they were very junior. Noman Siddiqui, Wing Commander Noman and Siddiqui, Squadron Siddiqui, when Noman shot Abhinandan and Siddiqui shot an Su-30. So we should be very humble in our attitude, thank Allah, but also look forward to the tradition that were left behind by these very, very tall people. And the Pakistan Air Force has done well. The Army has just taken care, not just, but about 10 years back, took care of an insurgency which is very difficult, messy, and which was complex. But the Pakistan Army, supported by the Pakistan Air Force, and had Pakistan Air Force not supported, we would have lost many, many more men in Waziristan and Zarb-e-Azm and all these efforts. So we took care of the insurgency. We have a huge threat today. And when the army chief says there can be terrorism, the TTP is not died and it's not out, it can give us problems, but he said we are fully ready, and I entirely agree with him.
Now, talking about that, former DG ISPR, Mr. Asif Ghafoor, said that we gave India a bloody nose, and the Pakistan Armed Forces have made it a habit of giving India a bloody nose, be it on the history or at the present stage. Now, has India learned a lesson from February 27th dogfight?
I will not be arrogant. We should be humble about what we have done. But Asif Ghafoor is absolutely right. We taught them a lesson. What lesson has India learned? Please remember, when in broad daylight, whereas they came in the thick of night and they lobbed their weapons, we say from a distance, they dropped their weapons, they got hold of a cow, of a crow and a few pine trees. Then we went in next day in broad daylight and re-established, and I'm a very proud sky blue warrior. We re-established military deterrence and political deterrence, all by a single service application. Please remember, Munib, air power in certain conditions can achieve political and military ends by itself, in certain conditions. It will always need boots on ground to fight their way through, supported by the air, and of course in the south, supported by the maritime forces, by the Pakistan Navy, but we re-established. India did not have the guts to relaunch an effort against this. They did not reciprocate by launching another. What have they learned? That the strategic strikes on ground failed. They have absolutely, General Huda, who oversaw this, he has not given an iota of evidence of these strategic strikes on ground, which we've been clamoring for, asking for in the international press. When they launched the airstrike, they thought they can stay below the nuclear threshold and do anything in the air to teach Pakistan a lesson. They could not. So they have chosen not to relaunch a military effort, a smaller one also. But where is the difficulty? India has got a huge military. It cannot employ, and we also know, we tried once in Kashmir, we tried second time in Kashmir, we tried third time in Kargil. In Kargil, we also found that military application has its severe limitations. But India has even bigger limitations, and that is nobody, the powers that be, will not allow India to launch a full-fledged war of 10 days to a month. If they don't do that from north to south, they will not generate their full combat power. Case in point, when the parliament was struck, in their case, they tried to launch a full-fledged war. America said, stop, stop, stop. They said, no, we are not stopping. We must decimate Pakistan into many pieces. So what did the Americans do? They launched, they gave a travel advisory to their people in Bangalore, etc. So when the Americans moved out, were moving out, the Europeans also said there is threat, so so the Indians said, please stop, we are not doing anything. So that is the limit of application of military power. Likewise in Bombay, the post-Bombay. If they want to test our resolve within Kashmir, now that is a small area in terms of the airspace above and on the ground. If they bring in 2, 3, 4, 5 corps, we can also take them there and keep the defensive balance in the center and in the south. They will bring in their 2, 3, 4, 5 elite squadrons, fighter squadrons to Kashmir. We can also do that. We have all the air bases in the north. We can also do that. And please remember, I want to give this good news to our viewers. Our Air Force leadership is full. I retired in 2005, so I don't know everything that is classified. But little that I know, by the beginning of next year, and by now Rafales with their Meteors are not operational fully. They've been flying, of course, across the LAC, in Ladakh, etc. But we will have a good antidote to Rafale in the form of J-10, possibly, and the PL-15. And remember, the J-10 is 4.5 generation fighter. And its PL-15 and its AISA radar are supposedly better than that of. So people, the Pakistan Air Force air warriors do not only train hard, and they train with grit, courage and belief, but our leadership is fully cognizant of the threats that India, when Modi said, had we had Rafales, things would have been different. So I think we have not done bad. We should not be arrogant, we should be humble. They are also a professional military. But with a small military, Army, Navy and Air Force, look at Dwarka. I know Admiral Tasneem, he's a great elder and a great friend, Sitara Jurat and Bar in 71. Through a small submarine, commanding a small submarine in the thick of the depths of Arabian Sea, Hangor, and he sunk the Kukri. And the Indians were taken aback. Just because of that, they could not launch a second strike onto Karachi. Because in the first strike, they had left the Karachi refinery aflame. And so like the Army chief said yesterday, the Army is ready, the Air Force is ready, the Navy is ready. The only thing required is the nation must be put together. It doesn't come together all by itself. Political leaders have to do that. Under, like we discussed in some of the programs, one national identity which should be a correct one, a Pakistani Pakistan. One common purpose, one set of vital national interests. These are some of the problems that we have. Otherwise, 6th and 7th September, and tomorrow probably the Navy is going to celebrate. We haven't done bad at all. But I think we should be humble and pray to God. We will do even better.
Air Marshal retired Masood Akhtar, thank you so much for being with us here in our studio and sharing your experiences about the 1965 war and Pakistan Air Force's ability to give a bloody nose to all the enemies of Pakistan. Thank you so much. And now we shall move on with our other news stories.
That was Defense Analyst Air Marshal retired Masood Akhtar earlier speaking to Muneeb Hamid. Now we have with us Air Commodore retired Dr. Ziaul Haq Shamsi, Defense Analyst from Islamabad. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. Why do you think India chose the path of aggression in 1965?
Actually, India was perhaps left with no option, and they probably miscalculated the resolve of Pakistan armed forces and the people of Pakistan. And they thought that they will be able to cow down Pakistan armed forces, and that is why perhaps they decided to impose a war on Pakistan. And perhaps their intelligence failed to visualize or report to the government that Pakistan was already prepared for it, especially Pakistan Air Force, which was already prepared for any kind of misadventure by the Indians. And this miscalculation, whenever war breaks out, it is the outcome of certain miscalculations by the leadership which gives a go-ahead for the war. And India did make that mistake in 1965 and perhaps again in 2019.
Right. Now, how do you think Pakistan managed to defeat an army many times bigger and better equipped at that time?
Yeah, I think a very, very pertinent question. Preparation, initiative, courage,